Hello and welcome to Current Affairs on JTV. Today's guest is Brigitte Gabriel, who is the founder and president of Act for America. Brigitte, it's a pleasure to have you on the show with us today. Now, I've obviously seen a lot of your life's work. I'm curious as to how much of it was, in a sense, informed by your early formative years in Lebanon. Perhaps you could tell us a bit about that.
Well, I'm delighted to be with you, Alan. And yes, my childhood influenced very much what I do as an adult, as usually the case with people who make it their life's mission to change the world in a certain area because they have been impacted by it. In my case, I was affected by terrorism at a very young age. My 9/11 happened to me in 1975 in Lebanon. When radical Islamists blew up my home, bringing it down, burying me under the rubble, wounded as they shouted, Allahu Akbar. I ended up in a hospital for 2.5 months. And as I laid in a hospital bed, I would ask my parents, why did they do this to us? And my father would tell me, because we are Christians. The Muslims consider us infidels and they want to kill us. So I learned that I am wanted dead at the age of 10 simply because I was born into the Christian faith and lived in a Christian town. Now, when I speak in America, and especially prior to ISIS, when I used to talk about these things, people would look at me and they could not really relate to what I'm saying. Jewish audience can know exactly and relate to what I'm saying because Jewish people have been persecuted for their religion, whether they practice their faith or not, simply because they were born as Jews. Well, for Christians living in the Middle East, especially as a minority, this has been my life experience for generations to come before me. We ended up leaving the bomb shelter and coming back home, but my home was no longer the home I left. I ended up living in a bomb shelter underground in an 8x10 room without electricity, without water, and very little food. To get some food, we would crawl under the bombs and we would dig out dandelions and different vegetation that grew around my bomb shelter because it was the only greenery we had to eat. To get some water, we would crawl under snipers' bullets to a nearby spring to get some water. And this became my life. I remember at the age of 13, dressing in my burial clothes because I wanted to look pretty when I am dead, knowing that when they come to slaughter me, there would be no one to bury me. And I ended up living in this bomb shelter for 7 years of my life.
I'll come back to that in a moment, but I just want to hone on what you said earlier, which is if you like, the propaganda that you were taught as a child about Jews and about Israel. And then we have the case, as you've written about quite movingly, about how your mother was seriously injured and she ends up being looked after by Israelis. And you were shocked by the fact that Israelis took care of her.
Well, I knew since I was a 10-year-old child that the Jews were our friends. It didn't happen when I was 17 because my mother was wounded, because by that time, Israel started coming to Lebanon in 1976. So I was a child at that time, 11 years old. So I knew this is why we were staying alive. My shock was when I went to Israel and I realized that the Jews were taking care of their enemy, the Palestinians. I was their friend. I was their ally. We fought in the trenches side by side because Christians and Jews are wanted dead by the same enemy, the Palestinians, who were majority Muslims who thought we were all infidels. So I knew why they were taking care of us. We were their friends. We were their allies. But I could not understand why they would take care of the Palestinians and the Muslims who would slit their throat in 30 seconds if they got a chance to.
And why? And why do you think they did it then? Why do you think they did it?
Why the Jews did it?
Yes.
Because I realized the Jews, as I started to learn about them, being around them, they valued life more than anything. When they treated my mother in that Israeli hospital in the emergency room, laying next to my mother were Palestinians brought in from Lebanon and Muslims brought in from Lebanon. The doctors did not see religion. They did not see nationality. They did not see political affiliation. They saw people in need and they helped. It was an unbelievable scene for me to witness. But as I got to learn about the Jews and their life for life and their love for humanity, and I learned about how the Jews learn in the Torah how to love humanity and make the world a better place and tikkun olam. I realized that's what drives every Jewish neshima. That's what drives every Jewish soul to make the world a better place, to love people, to make a difference in the world, starting with yourself. I mean, the concept of Yom Kippur, of 24-hour day of reflection, to reflect on yourself and say, who do I need to beg forgiveness from? How can I make it right with the world and with my God in order for me to move to a new year?
I'll ask what sounds like a crazy question. Why didn't your parents move? So, for example, we've seen in Syria the massive refugee flows out of Syria because of civil war, essentially, the things that you saw. Why did your parents stay put?
Well, very interesting. Actually, my father went to the banks in Beirut knowing that, seeing what was happening in Lebanon, and withdrew all his life savings out of the bank and banknotes, hoping to flee and come to America. 2 days later, in the bombing of my home, my father's money was burned to ashes. Not only that, we were surrounded by Palestinians who set up checkpoints around our towns and surrounded us to slaughter us. Islamist Palestinians at that time, Yasser Arafat and the PLO, who were in Lebanon operating and working with the radical Muslims in Lebanon, hoping to create a base from which to fight Israel, kill the Jews, and throw them into the sea. And what happened with us, we were living in southern Lebanon. So we had no access to airports and no access to any place to leave our area because they completely cut us off. So we became prisoners in this geographical location, trapped and no way out. Our only lifeline ended up actually being the state of Israel, because when we were surrounded to be slaughtered and we knew what our fate was going to be, few people of my town got together and they said, we've got to go to the Jews and beg for help, because if we go to the Jews and beg for help, because we lived on the Israeli border, I lived 5 kilometers, not miles, from the Israeli border.
Yes.
And we thought if we go to the Jews and beg for help, the Jews are not going to slaughter us because we had more shared values with them. And that's how we stayed alive, because Israel came in to help the Christians in the south.
The Israelis came, and I think you've been quite open about it. You've said that Israel essentially saved your life when the Israelis pushed to the Litani River in 1978. So did you therefore come under Israeli rule essentially at that point?
No, not at all. Actually, Israel was working with the Christians hand in hand, helping the Christians take back their democracy and protect themselves, and even try to kick out the radical Islamic elements operating out of Lebanon. And that's why Israel invaded Lebanon, by the way, in 1982, trying to help the Christians kick out the Islamic terrorist organizations set up in Lebanon, because by 1982, we had 11 Islamic terrorist organizations operating out of Lebanon, including the PLO. So even though Israel established the security zone, Israel was working hand in hand with the Christian Lebanese, training them how to fight, helping them, providing them with ammunition, providing them with machine guns, with tanks to basically help and protect themselves. So it wasn't an occupier relationship. It was two allies who have shared values trying to work together to defend each other from the radical Islamic combined Palestinian enemy that was after destroying both of us at the same time.
Well, I know you're calling the PLO a radical Islamic entity. That's not normally how the PLO is seen. It's normally seen as a secular, maybe terrorist group, but not a religious terrorist group. Why are you making that judgment on the PLO? Surely they may have been in league with some pretty bad Islamists, but for them to themselves be Islamists, that doesn't seem, historically an accurate statement.
Well, today we call them Islamists because they are radicals and they hate the infidels and they want to kill. When you look at the actions of the PLO, even though they were known to the world state as nationalists, because at that time people really didn't know what Islamist is. When you talk to me as a child who's born and raised in the Middle East, I can tell you that ever since I was a child, even though I was born in a Christian home and my parents never taught hate because we are Christians, but by the time I was born, the majority of southern Lebanon and the majority of Lebanon had become majority Muslims. I can tell you the word for Israel was Azrael, the name of the devil. The Jews were the evil barbarians who all should be killed and thrown into the sea. Arab children are fed hatred towards the Jews from their mother's milk. Jews don't have a right to live nor exist anywhere in the world if possible, let alone in any area in the Middle East. Now, it's very difficult for people in the West to actually understand, believe, or relate to that. But for someone like me, as a child growing up in Lebanon, this was natural conversation sitting around the dinner table. My father owned a restaurant. So a lot of time I would eat dinner at the restaurant with my daddy. These were the conversations I heard around the tables, around my table, with the table surrounding us at my father's restaurant. This is the mentality. And remember, Palestinian perfected and perpetrated terrorist attacks against children way before Khomeini came to power in the 70s. Remember what they used to do with their attacks, the Fidaiyin, in northern Israel, on Israeli children, massacring Israeli children and blowing them up in buses. So the Palestinians were doing what ISIS and the Islamists are doing today, except back then in the world stage, they didn't call them Islamists because Islamist is now a term we are familiar with. Back then, there were nationalist Arabs fighting for their land, fighting for their right. It just happens that the Jews stood in the way and took their land.
Well, I don't dispute anything of what you've said about the PLO's tactics, but I think the term Islamist is usually used to denote somebody who believes in, I suppose, an Islamic way of life. The PLO didn't really go down that route. They weren't interested in leading an Islamic way of life. I see what you're saying, that the tactics is what you're talking about, not the actual religious fervor.
Islam is a political movement cloaked in religion. So the PLO had the political version of Islam that they believed in. And here's what I mean by that. When Yasser Arafat signed the peace treaty, the Oslo Accord with Israel in 1993, a lot of people in the Arabic world, like Jordanian media and Egyptian media, would ask him, how could you sign a peace treaty with Israel? And Yasser Arafat would tell them, remember Hudaybiyah. Now, Hudaybiyah, what he was referring to was a battle where Muhammad connived and lied to his enemy when he ran into a war with the Meccans when they ambushed him in Hudaybiyah. Prophet Muhammad signed a treaty with them called the Treaty of Al-Hudaybiyah. Muhammad signed a 10-year peace treaty with them that he will not attack the Meccans. He used the treaty in order to strengthen and arm his military and build his military again. He broke the treaty 2 years later and attacked the Meccans when they least expected it, and he was able to take over the city in 24 hours. So when Yasser Arafat would tell the Egyptian press and the Jordanian press, remember Al-Hudaybiyah, everybody knew exactly what he was talking about. He was referring about tricking the Jews into signing a treaty where he can go back. Basically, that's exactly what he did. Went back, got his territories back, got the Jews to finance him coming back, got the Jews to finance and train his police, give them weapons. And when he was strong enough in 2000, look when the Intifada started and look what happened. So Yasser Arafat used the Treaty of Hudaybiyah as an example of war based on Prophet Muhammad's strategy of war to the T, while Jews in Jerusalem were, Shalom Achshav, were singing peace now, peace now. They didn't understand what they were dealing with. So yes, the PLO was a nationalist movement, but it was a nationalist movement based on the political side of Islam, that because Islam is a political ideology cloaked in religion. So there is a political aspect of it.
Is your general contention then that Islam itself is the problem?
Islam as an ideology is the problem. Even though most Muslims around the world are peaceful people, most of them cannot speak Arabic, have never even read the Quran in Arabic, do not even understand what's in the Quran. They're cultural Muslims who love practicing the structure, who love practicing the spiritual side of Islam, who love practicing believing that there is a God who watches everything, who like structure in their life. Islam is a very structured religion. Those people we have no problem with. Spirituality is wonderful for anybody who wants to follow spirituality. What we have a problem with is the core political system, which is the ideology in Islam. And that is the problem. This is why when you see misunderstanders of Islam worldwide today, whether they are Boko Haram in Nigeria, Lashkar-e-Taiba in India, Ansar al-Sharia in Libya, Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas in Gaza, ISIS in Sham and Iraq, it doesn't matter what skin color they have, what language they speak, what passport they hold, whether it's Al-Shabaab in Somalia. when they all adhere to the same ideology, understood across the world by different people who speak a different language, as long as they understand and read the ideology. So while you have a lot of moderate Muslims who do not want to have anything to do with the religion, the political ideology in what brings them all together, and it is based in the Quran.
So, okay, but is Islam a religion or a political ideology?
Islam is a political ideology, first and foremost, cloaked in religion. Islam started in the early 600s as a spiritual movement when Prophet Muhammad got his revelation from the angel Gabriel. Prophet Muhammad tried to preach his religion in Mecca and tried to recruit his people. He tried for 12 years and failed. That's when he decided to go to Medina and preach his religion to the Jews, which was the hub, the business hub of Arabia at the time. And he thought, if the Jews accept me, that would give me credibility in the eyes of my own people, so they will accept me and follow me. And after he tried to recruit the Jews said, no, thank you, we like our religion, we do not want to be recruited. That's when Prophet Muhammad turned against them. That's when Islam changed from the first 12 years of being a spiritual movement into becoming a political movement. This is why when you read verses in the Quran, they're the Quran verses before the Medina period, and they are the verses after the Medina period.
Right.
And this is where you see all the violent verses in the Quran, the latter verses that were written after the Medina period.
But surely,
and in Islam, allow me to finish my thought. In Islam, there is the law of abrogation, the law of nasakh wal mansukh. If there are two verses in the Quran contradicting each other, the latter verse wipes off the first verse, and the latter verse becomes the law. Okay. And that's why when radicals and moderates get into a debate together, the radicals always win the debate because the law is on their side.
Well, you say the law is on their side, but you'll be aware of the diversity of Islam. You'll be aware there are many different schools of jurisprudence. There are different sects. They don't all believe the same thing. You're giving one interpretation, which is quite correct, but there are many other interpretations. People who would disagree, Muslims watching this now would disagree with you. They would say, okay, X, a radical Muslim, would say exactly what Brigitte just said, but I don't believe that. So what's the issue? It surely isn't all of Islam you're talking about. You're talking about a particular interpretation of Islam.
I am talking about all the school of jurisprudence were closed in the year 1000. After the death of Prophet Muhammad for 300 years, you had different ulama that came and talked about their version of Islam and dissected Islam and wrote the books. This is why we have the Quran, the Hadith, and the Seerah, which makes all the body of the religion of Islam. By the year 1000, all the school of jurisprudence have been closed, and they all agreed on all the foundation of Islam. This is why the foundation is non-negotiable, is not debatable. You don't question it, even though since then you have a lot of people who came and followed the religion who believe completely differently. Look, in Judaism, you've got Reform Jews, you've got Orthodox Jews, you've got the ultra-Orthodox, you've got everything in the middle. The same thing in Christianity. You've got the Protestants, you've got the Catholics, you've got the Episcopalians, and they not all see the same thing. They don't see eye to eye. Yes. You've got Catholics who don't believe in marriage. Monks should not get married. You've got Protestants or born-again Christians who believe you can marry and have as many children as you want, even divorce and get married again in the church, which Catholics, don't believe in. So in every religion, there are debates as to what the religion stands for, but the core of the religion is the same. In our religion, in Judeo-Christianity, our Bible says, come, let's reason together. We debate our Bible because it's a part of our DNA to debate our Bible. Because the Bible says, debate me, question, always question and debate. In Islam, there's no debating and questioning. So while many Muslims do not agree with what the radicals are doing, I know a lot of Muslim friends of mine who do not want to have anything to do with the radicals, yet they call themselves practicing Muslims, because they like the spiritual aspect of it. It's tradition. You as Jews understand very much the importance of traditions. There are Jews who never even go to temple, but traditions when it comes to Rosh Hashanah and the families coming together and Hanukkah, they don't even go to temple, but they celebrate Hanukkah because it's a part of the tradition. The same thing with Islam. Now, in Islam, there's a movement called the Ahmadiyya movement, which started in the last century, and they are wonderful. They have their own caliphate, they have their own caliph. They are the reformers of Islam. They account for very small, less than 20 million around the world. They are a fraction, a dot on the map of 1.6 billion Muslims around the world. The Muslims, the regular Muslims, consider the Ahmadiyya movement as apostates. They actually want to kill them because they look at them as you and me, as people who left Islam.
But again, you're extrapolating what a small number of Muslims believe and making it about all Muslims. It's not true that Muslims I know want to kill Ahmadiyyas. They don't. The point is, surely it's not possible to again say that all Muslims want to kill Ahmadiyyas. I know many Muslims who don't want to kill Ahmadiyyas.
Right, but those who understand their religion do not consider the Ahmadiyya movement as an authentic Islamic movement. They consider them apostates.
Yeah,
so
but
you have
Orthodox
those who
Jews,
understand their religion look at the Ahmadiyya movement as not a Muslim.
Orthodox Jews will consider Reform Jews to be essentially not keeping the faith.
Right, listen, I had Orthodox Jews demonstrating against me because they don't believe Israel should exist. They actually are on the side of Iran. So you have those type of people as well. But look, when we're talking about the Islamic movement right now, we are talking about these type of people driving the agenda right now. When we talk about radical Islam, when you watch television tonight, they are talking about what ISIS did, what radical terrorist organization did. It doesn't matter what part of the world, whether it is Al-Shabaab kidnapping, 250 girls, Nigerian girls, and they disappeared, or whether we're talking about Lashkar-e-Taiba bombing a hotel in Mumbai, or whether we are talking about some movement in Australia who committed a terrorist attack, or in Canada. What we're talking about is the same radicals who adhere to the same ideology. They don't represent all Muslims, but this is the issue right now that we are talking about globally. And that's what we need to focus on. And that's what moderate Muslims around the world need to come together and work against and report those radicals from their own community. When I hear in England, they are monitoring between 20 to 30,000 radical Islamic operatives operating in England alone right now. Those operatives are not isolated. They live within a community. They have friends. They talk to their friends in the community. How come the community is not coming forward and reporting them and turning them in? How can a terrorist attacker in Paris who committed the terrorist attacks here before last on Christmas, be able to hide 2 blocks from where he committed the terrorist attack for 2 weeks without the authority being able to find him, living in his apartment, walking down his street? These are answers the moderate Muslim community need to come forward and answer.
I hear what you're saying. I do want to point out that in the British case, at least, I can't speak for other places, there have been numerous tip-offs from within the Muslim community about terrorists. Unfortunately, the recent terrorist attacks we've had here, there were people who had informed on the radical sort of ideologies of those people who later committed terrorist acts, and it may well be that it was the authorities not picking that up that was a problem, as opposed to identity theft. Anyway, Brigitte,
right, which leads us to the political correctness aspect of things. A lot of people in the West are afraid to speak about these issues, lest they be looked at as racist or Islamophobes, or a lot of them are afraid to lose their jobs, which shows us that we need a fundamental change in the leadership in our Western nations. We need the Churchills. We need the people who stood up and said, you need to speak the truth, as difficult, as unpopular as it may be. But we need to have the difficult conversation. Like Theresa May said, this is the time that try men's souls. And right now, when we're talking about people blowing up innocent young girls at a concert in Manchester, now is the time for Western nations to come together and say, we have a problem. We need to discuss this problem, and we need to do everything we can to uproot this problem without this nonsense of political correctness, because a lot of lives are at stake and the future of Western civilization is at stake.
I don't dispute we have a problem. I think we agree there's a problem. We may have differing views on how to solve it, but I want to at least thank you for your time today and for joining us on JTV, and see you again soon for another episode of Current Affairs.
Thank you.